They call it loneliness. I call it clarity. You felt it, haven't you? That suffocating moment at a party when everyone's laughing, but you're drowning in small talk. When your mind craves depth, but the world offers only shallow puddles. When you'd rather spend Friday night with Dostoevsky than drunk strangers. Society whispers you're broken, antisocial, missing out. But what if they're wrong? What if your so-called loneliness isn't a bug? It's a feature. What if the same mind that makes you feel alien in crowds is the exact mind humanity needs to evolve? Einstein didn't discover relativity at a networking event. Tesla didn't revolutionize electricity during happy hour. Schopenhauer didn't unlock the mysteries of human nature while making cocktail chatter. They found genius in the quiet. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Intelligence is isolating. Not because smart people are snobs, but because depth seeks depth, and shallow water drowns deep thoughts. Your brain isn't broken for craving solitude. Your soul isn't damaged for choosing books over bars. Your heart isn't cold for preferring meaningful silence to meaningless noise. You're not antisocial. You're selectively social. And in a world addicted to connection without meaning, your discernment isn't just valuable, it's revolutionary. So before you apologize for who you are, remember this. The greatest ideas in human history weren't born in crowds. They were born in the sacred silence where brilliant minds dared to think differently. Your solitude isn't your weakness. It's your secret weapon. This phenomenon isn't some modern curse of the digital age. For centuries, a striking pattern has emerged. The minds that changed the world often worked in the shadows, not the spotlight. Take Einstein. While the scientific establishment debated in conferences, he was alone in a Swiss patent office, revolutionizing our understanding of space and time. His greatest breakthroughs came not from collaboration, but from what he called the holy curiosity that thrived in solitude. Tesla died alone in New York, surrounded not by people, but by inventions decades ahead of their time. His isolation wasn't failure, it was focus. While others networked, he innovated. And Schopenhauer? He crystallized what many brilliant minds had felt but couldn't articulate. All truly great thoughts are conceived while walking alone. But here's what's fascinating. These weren't antisocial recluses. They were selectively social, conserving their mental energy for what truly mattered. This raises the fundamental question. Are brilliant minds pushed towards solitude by a world that can't keep up? Or do they choose it because that's where genius flourishes? The answer reveals a profound truth about human consciousness itself, and why society gets it so wrong about intelligent people. The conventional wisdom says isolation is pathology. We're told humans are social animals who need constant interaction to thrive. But this one-size-fits-all model ignores a crucial reality. Different minds operate on different frequencies. Some minds are like radio stations. They broadcast widely and receive signals from everywhere. These are your extroverts, energized by constant input and interaction. But other minds are like precision instruments. They need quiet to detect the subtle signals others miss. These minds don't avoid people out of fear or arrogance. They avoid noise because they're tuned for signal. Loneliness has always been viewed with a certain suspicion. Those who distance themselves from the social world are quickly labeled as strange, antisocial, or even problematic. But what if this perception is wrong? Throughout history, some of the greatest intellectual figures have viewed loneliness not as a burden, but as a gift. While society seeks to avoid it at all costs, some have understood that it could be fertile ground for intellectual and creative development. Arthur Schopenhauer was one of the first to express this idea directly. Solitude is the lot of superior spirits. In his view, Genius often distances individuals from the masses because those with more refined thinking have difficulty finding conversation partners who are up to truly profound discussions. And he wasn't alone in this thinking. Albert Einstein, one of history's most brilliant scientists, placed great importance on moments of withdrawal. For him, silence was fertile ground for the emergence of innovative ideas. He even claimed that the monotony and solitude of a peaceful life stimulates the creative spirit. This doesn't mean he rejected human interaction, but rather that he understood the power of isolation to nurture deep reflection. Another striking example is that of Nikola Tesla. Throughout his life, he distanced himself from conventional relationships and avoided distractions that would likely have impaired his intellectual productivity. Tesla believed that constant social interactions drained his energy and distracted him from what was truly important, his inventions. But was his isolation a choice or a consequence of his mind being ahead of its time? Here emerges an essential reflection. Loneliness can be both tool and barrier. When a person withdraws from the world to immerse themselves in their thoughts, loneliness becomes a space of creation and self-knowledge. However, when isolation stems from a feeling of misunderstanding and inability to connect with others, it can transform into a wall that prevents meaningful exchanges and limits fulfillment. The great geniuses found in solitude a space to refine their ideas, but this doesn't mean that isolation is always beneficial. The line between genius and social distance is thinner than we imagine. When society rejects those who think differently, is isolation always a choice? Or is it the only alternative for those who find no harmony in the external world? The truth is that some people find joy in being surrounded by friends, while others prefer the tranquility of a quiet room. Carl Jung was one of the first to study this difference in depth. In his view, humanity can be divided into two large groups, introverts and extroverts. Extroverts draw their energy from the external world. They love constant discussions, dynamic environments, and feel invigorated by interaction with others. Conversely, introverts follow an opposite path. Their energy comes from introspection. They need silence and solitude to reorganize their thoughts and recharge. This raises an interesting question. Why are so many highly intelligent people introverted? The explanation might lie in how their minds process information. Those who think analytically or reflectively need time to assimilate ideas and make connections. While quick conversations and superficial interactions may be pleasant for some, they can seem hollow and exhausting to a sharp mind. This doesn't mean introverts don't like to socialize. They simply prefer deeper and more meaningful exchanges where there's genuine sharing of ideas. The problem is that society values extroversion. From childhood, we're taught that being communicative, expansive, and sociable is a sign of success. Reserved children are encouraged to open up more, and introverted adults are often perceived as shy or uncharismatic. However, this vision obscures an essential fact. Many great figures in history found their strength in silence. Jung warned about the dangers of adopting behavior that doesn't correspond to one's true nature. An introvert who tries to adapt to an extroverted model risks exhaustion because their mind isn't designed to withstand a constant flow of stimulation. Self-awareness plays a key role in this dynamic. When a person understands and accepts their own nature without guilt, they better manage external pressures. The fact of preferring solitude doesn't mean having social difficulties. It simply means that one's energy is directed inward rather than outward. This is perhaps why so many geniuses chose introspection as a natural path. Not because they rejected the company of others, but because they knew that for deep thinking, they needed a space protected from the distractions of the external world. In most cases, intelligence creates a gap between the individual and their environment. Those who possess a sharp mind often have deep interests, complex questions, and a perception of the world that few people share. This makes social interactions frustrating because it's a challenge to find someone with the same level of intellectual curiosity. Everyday discussions generally revolve around repetitive topics, current events, banalities about routine. For a person with a curious and analytical mind, this type of exchange can seem monotonous and uninteresting. This creates a dilemma. These individuals don't flee social life out of contempt for others, but because they rarely find conversations that truly stimulate them. And when they try to address deeper topics, they often encounter indifference or even impatience. Research shows that individuals with high IQ tend to prefer limited social contact. The reason is neither arrogance nor misanthropy, but rather a natural need to preserve their mental energy for what truly stimulates them intellectually. There's also a key psychological factor: cognitive dissonance. When a person realizes that their thoughts and reflections aren't in harmony with social norms, they may feel alienated. This feeling of incompatibility often pushes them to choose silence instead of frustrating interactions. Another element that complicates connection with others is the high demand for quality exchanges. People with great analytical capacity don't settle for vague answers or superficial arguments. They seek enriching discussions, exchanges of ideas that allow them to expand their worldview. Since these conversations are rare, they eventually avoid overly banal interactions. The price of genius is often loneliness, not because these individuals choose to isolate themselves, but because the world doesn't always offer them the kind of connection they seek. Thus, loneliness stems not only from a social preference, but also from a necessity to avoid mental overload. Highly intelligent people generally possess heightened sensitivity to their environment. Excessive noise, crowds, forced conversations, and frequent interactions can be extremely exhausting. This type of excessive stimulation doesn't just drain their energy, it can cause real mental fatigue. Their mind is in perpetual activity, analyzing, processing information, and identifying patterns. While many act socially without feeling particular fatigue, those who have sharper perception need moments of recovery to organize their thoughts and prevent emotional exhaustion. Carl Jung explored this connection between intelligence and sensitivity, explaining that the more a person becomes aware of themselves, the more intensely they feel emotions and the weight of the world around them. Deep introspection expands perception and makes the individual more receptive to what happens around them. This phenomenon is particularly visible in people described as hypersensitive, a common trait among intuitive and reflective minds. These individuals don't just observe their environment, they absorb it. They perceive emotions, tone of voice, subtle expressions, and even energy fluctuations that most people ignore. This transforms every social interaction into an intensely emotional and sometimes exhausting experience. This heightened perception can be real capital because it allows deeper understanding of others and the surrounding world. However, it can also become a constant source of overload. The mind of these individuals never deactivates this emotional and sensory radar, making prolonged interactions, crowds, and superficial conversations particularly exhausting. Beyond the emotional impact, there's also a physiological effect. Studies show that hypersensitive people have more intense activation of their nervous system when confronted with ordinary stimuli like noise, bright light, or multiple interactions. While most people manage these factors without difficulty, those who possess high sensitivity feel extreme fatigue after a social event and need longer recovery time. The problem isn't just physical. Psychologically, the need to adapt to society's fast pace can be a real burden. Many feel constant pressure to participate in interactions that don't correspond to their natural mode of functioning. When they try to withdraw to preserve their energy, they're often perceived as cold, distant, or disengaged. This social judgment creates permanent internal conflict, adapt to expectations and exhaust oneself, or respect one's need for solitude and be misunderstood. For many, this incompatibility becomes unbearable over time. The emotional exhaustion caused by excessive interaction leads them to an almost inevitable result: distancing themselves, not out of disinterest in others, but because maintaining constant social presence would mean sacrificing their mental well-being. This is why it's essential to understand this mechanism to avoid the trap of extreme isolation. Hypersensitive people must learn to set healthy boundaries, recognize moments when they need to withdraw to recharge, and ensure that this distancing doesn't become permanent escape. Ultimately, it's essential to respect one's own nature. There's nothing wrong with needing silence to reorganize one's mind. But how can we reconcile this need with a society that imposes hyperconnectivity? We live in a world where exposure, rapid communication, and intense socialization are valued. Success is often measured by the number of relationships, constant presence at events, and the ability to interact with anyone at any time. But this vision of social interaction doesn't suit everyone. For those who have a deeper perception of life, the pressure to always be available can be oppressive. The need to engage in superficial conversations, participate in forced exchanges, and adapt to a hectic social rhythm can generate considerable mental fatigue. There's a false notion that more reserved or introverted people are antisocial, arrogant, or even depressed. Yet not everyone needs constant interaction to feel fulfilled. The problem arises because society erects extroversion as an ideal. From childhood, children are encouraged to be communicative and sociable, while those who prefer to observe and reflect are pushed to open up more. In the work world, those who express themselves the most and put themselves in the forefront are often perceived as more competent, even if they don't necessarily possess more knowledge. This model creates conflicts for more introspective individuals. The effort to conform to it can lead to great emotional fatigue, to the point that some choose to withdraw completely. Carl Jung already criticized this obsession with permanent interaction. He explained that most social relationships are superficial, and that only a few are capable of truly enriching discussions. In his view, the pursuit of self-knowledge requires moments of solitude, because it's in silence that one can truly hear one's own thoughts, protected from external influences. But being different from social norms doesn't mean being wrong. Each person has their own way of interacting with the world, and there's nothing wrong with appreciating solitude, as long as it doesn't transform into extreme isolation. The real challenge is perhaps not to adapt to an imposed social model, but rather to learn to respect one's own nature without guilt. Ultimately, do those who choose solitude really lose something, or do they simply protect their energy in a world that demands much without always offering in return? Being alone doesn't mean being lost. Chosen solitude is a space of freedom, a refuge where the mind can expand without external interference. Society often associates solitude with social isolation, but this vision is erroneous. Those who allow themselves moments of withdrawal don't necessarily reject the world. They simply create an environment conducive to introspection and personal development. Silence offers a unique opportunity for reflection without external distraction. It becomes possible to observe one's own thoughts with more clarity, recognize and understand one's emotions, and understand what is truly essential. This process is fundamental for those who want to grow internally, because it allows them to explore their identity without being influenced by others' expectations. Solitude acts as a catalyst for creativity, but in balance with human interactions, ideas come to life and find meaning. An excess of stimulation and social exchanges can fragment attention and prevent the development of complex thoughts. Conversely, a mind that benefits from a quiet space can see innovative concepts emerge with more clarity. But there's an even deeper dimension in the experience of solitude: the freedom to be completely oneself without seeking validation from others. Many spend their lives adapting their behavior to social expectations and seeking external recognition, sometimes to the detriment of their own essence. Yet learning to be content with oneself allows one to realize that true acceptance doesn't come from others, but from oneself. This journey corresponds to what Jung called individuation, a process that leads each person to become fully aware of their unique identity. Detaching from the world's noise doesn't mean fleeing reality, but rather creating a space to develop freely without unnecessary influence. However, the freedom that solitude offers exists only if it's a choice. If it results from fear or frustration, it can become a prison instead of a springboard to fulfillment. This is why it's essential to distinguish between solitude and isolation. The first is a state of inner fullness, while the second can be the reflection of suffering and separation from the world. The true secret lies in balance, knowing how to appreciate moments of introspection without completely cutting connections to others, using solitude to strengthen one's mind, understand one's emotions, and realign one's goals without falling into the trap of excessive withdrawal. For true freedom lies not in the number of people who surround us, but in the ability to be at peace with oneself, whether alone or accompanied. Being alone can be a liberating experience, but it can also become a burden. Solitude can be a conscious choice or the consequence of involuntary distancing, and it's this difference that determines whether it will be a source of growth or an obstacle to well-being. Voluntary isolation occurs when a person consciously chooses to withdraw, to reflect, study, create, or simply reorganize their thoughts. This choice is guided by a desire for introspection and self-knowledge. It's healthy solitude, where the individual feels comfortable with their own company. In contrast, harmful isolation appears when a person distances themselves because they feel out of sync with the world, misunderstood, or rejected. This withdrawal, instead of being a refuge for development, becomes a barrier that prevents the establishment of meaningful connections. But how do we know if isolation is beneficial or harmful? The answer lies in its impact on emotional and mental state. If solitude brings clarity, peace, and creativity, it's probably a healthy choice. But if it generates sadness, apathy, and emptiness, it might be time to reassess the situation. Another key factor is duration. Distancing oneself from time to time can be revitalizing, but prolonged solitude that lacks any human interaction can have negative effects on mental health. The absence of meaningful connection can lead to emotional isolation and make any return to others more difficult. This is why balance between solitude and social connection is essential. Respecting one's need for moments of solitude without guilt or social pressure is fundamental for personal development. But it's equally important not to cut all bridges, because learning doesn't come only from introspection, but also from exchanges with others. Finally, the real challenge isn't to avoid solitude, but to use it intelligently. Not every solitary person is necessarily intelligent, and not every intelligent person is necessarily solitary. Nevertheless, there's an undeniable connection between deep thinking and solitude. The analytical mind needs space to expand. Permanently exposed to superficial stimulations and repetitive interactions, it risks becoming scattered. Here, solitude becomes a necessity for those who want to deepen their intellect. But does deep reflection really require solitude? It all depends on the balance between the inner world and the outer world. Those who allow themselves moments of solitude can better organize their thoughts, reflect without interruption, and nourish their creativity. This time alone is crucial for intellectual development because it enables independent thinking free from external influences. However, the danger lies in transforming this distancing into permanent isolation. It's easy to believe that solitude is the only path for those seeking knowledge and fulfillment. Some even avoid social interactions not out of choice but out of frustration, convinced that the external world has nothing to offer them. This is one of the great risks of prolonged isolation, progressive separation from reality. When a person stays too long in their bubble, they lose the opportunity to confront their ideas with other perspectives and enrich their thinking through dialogue. Carl Jung warned against this danger. He emphasized the importance of introspection, while reminding that personal fulfillment rests on a balance between inner reflection and external interactions. Excessive isolation can lead to mental rigidity, reluctance to new ideas, and the illusion that solitude is the only answer. Another trap of isolation is the development of a feeling of intellectual superiority. When a person withdraws because they feel they can't find stimulating exchanges, they risk falling into the idea that no one around them has anything interesting to contribute. This mentality can further reinforce their isolation and cut them off from valuable perspectives. So how do we avoid these traps? The first step is understanding that intellectual depth doesn't exclude the simplicity of human interactions. Not all conversations need to be stimulating or philosophical to have value. Even light exchanges can offer interesting insights into how others perceive the world. Being present in interactions without the constant expectation of intellectual debate can make these moments more pleasant and enriching. Another approach is to actively seek environments where intellectual exchanges are favored. Instead of randomly searching for connections, it can be more beneficial to join groups or communities that share similar interests. Today, thanks to technology and access to information, it's easier than ever to find circles where critical thinking, creativity, and reflection are valued. When one develops in an environment where intellect and introspection are appreciated, exchanges become natural and authentic without having to sacrifice the quality of discussions or feel forced to isolate. It's also essential to practice active listening and cultivate sincere curiosity. Very often, the feeling of not finding interesting people stems more from how we approach interactions than from a real lack of stimulating individuals around us. Asking the right questions, being sincerely interested in others' viewpoints, and accepting to leave one's intellectual bubble can transform even the simplest conversations into enriching exchanges. Learning doesn't come only from those who share exactly our worldview, but also and especially from the contrast between different ways of thinking. Moreover, finding a balance between introspection and social interaction helps avoid both mental overload and extreme isolation. Moments of solitude are essential for organizing thoughts and deepening ideas, but it's through exchanges that these are tested and strengthened. Knowing when to withdraw to preserve mental clarity and when to indulge in light interactions without demanding that every conversation be profound brings more flexibility to our relationship with the world. Intelligence shouldn't be a factor of separation, but a tool that enables calmer navigation between different forms of human interaction. Learning to manage one's need for reflection without rejecting simpler experiences could be the key to a more balanced life, where solitude is an ally but doesn't become a limitation that hinders personal development. The secret lies in the use we make of solitude. It must be an instrument of growth and not an absolute refuge. The time spent alone must serve to nourish the mind, structure thinking, and deepen knowledge without minimizing the richness of human interactions. True intelligence isn't limited to the ability for deep reflection. It also includes the ability to oscillate between introspection and connection with the world. Isolation may be necessary to build critical thinking, but it's exchanges, challenges, and new experiences that keep it moving and developing. In the end, solitude shouldn't be perceived as a prison, but as a space of freedom, a place where the mind can breathe, strengthen itself, and return to the world with even clearer vision. For being intelligent doesn't mean fleeing social life. It means knowing when it's time to withdraw and when it's time to connect. solitude can be a burden or a gift. It all depends on how we approach it. If we've learned something here, it's that distancing oneself from the world doesn't mean rejecting social life, but often responding to a need for deepening, reflection, and personal growth. The greatest minds in history found fertile ground in solitude to let their ideas mature, but in exchange with the world, they came to life. Silence, far from being emptiness, is often the most conducive environment for creativity and self-knowledge. However, excessive isolation can become a trap. When a person completely cuts themselves off from the world, they risk losing contact with reality and missing essential learning. Balance is therefore crucial, allowing oneself moments of introspection while remaining open to exchanges and human connections. The real question isn't whether intelligent people avoid social life, but why they do it. It's not always a conscious choice. Sometimes it's simply a natural response to a world that seems too loud, too fast, too superficial. Solitude and intelligence are more connected than we think. Understanding this dynamic is essential for leading a more authentic life. The prevailing social model doesn't suit everyone, and learning to respect one's need for silence and reflection can bring a true sense of freedom and mental clarity. Your need for solitude isn't a character flaw, it's a character trait. The same mind that craves depth over small talk, meaning over noise, is the mind that advances humanity. Werner Heisenberg didn't apologize for his solitude. Wernher von Braun didn't diminish his genius to fit in. Schopenhauer didn't pretend to enjoy meaningless chatter. And neither should you. The paradox of intelligence isn't that it makes you lonely, it's that it makes you selective. You don't avoid people, you avoid emptiness. You don't reject connection, you reject pretense. Your solitude isn't isolation, it's incubation. In a world obsessed with constant connection, your ability to think alone is revolutionary. Your comfort with silence is subversive. Your depth in a shallow world isn't just valuable, it's essential. So the next time someone tells you that you should go out more, remember this. The greatest ideas in human history weren't born at parties. They were born in the quiet spaces where brilliant minds dared to think differently. So here we stand at the crossroads of understanding. You are not broken. You are not lacking. You are not too much or not enough. You are precisely calibrated for a world that doesn't yet understand its own need for depth. While others chase the dopamine of constant connection, you've discovered something far more precious: the cocaine of consciousness, pure, unfiltered thought in the cathedral of silence. Your loneliness, it's not loneliness at all. It's selectivity. It's sovereignty. It's the courage to be alone with your own greatness. Every moment you choose depth over shallow, meaning over noise, authentic solitude over performative socializing, you're not just living. You're evolving. The world will try to convince you that isolation equals death. But you know better. You've tasted the nectar of your own mind. You've felt the electric thrill of an idea born in silence, nurtured in solitude, and destined to change everything. Einstein knew it. Tesla lived it. Schopenhauer declared it. And now you own it. Your solitude isn't your shadow, it's your spotlight. Not your weakness, your weapon of mass creation. So the next time someone pities your quiet Friday night, smile knowingly. While they're drowning in noise, you're swimming in possibility. While they're collecting people, you're cultivating ideas. While they're afraid to be alone, you're brave enough to be yourself. This is your manifesto. This is your moment. Stop apologizing for your depth. Start celebrating your difference. The world doesn't need another social butterfly. It needs your beautiful, brilliant, uncompromisingly authentic mind. Welcome to the revolution of solitude. Population, you. And that, my fellow travelers of the inner cosmos, is not just enough. It's everything.